Hello, this is Krystal, and thank you for joining me for this week's First Chapter Friday. Today I will be reading from the beginning of Lorna Barrett's Book Clubbed, a Booktown Mystery. Chapter 1. For once, the winter weather seemed to be cooperating, meaning that unless any unforeseen complications arose, Trisha Miles, owner of the mystery bookstore Haven's Got a Clue, would get a lot accomplished on that particular Saturday in February. No ice, no snow, and though the sun had not yet made an appearance in Booktown, otherwise known as Stoneham, New Hampshire, the skies were due to clear before lunchtime, hopefully bringing plenty of book-buying customers with it. Meanwhile, Tricia and her sister Angelica, who owned not only the cookery bookstore, but a charming retro cafe, booked for lunch, and had a half share in a local bed and breakfast called the Share Comfort Inn, had a date to look over a private book collection. These kinds of sales were few and far between, and their window to make a bid on the collection was narrow, between 10 and 11 o'clock. Tricia glanced at her watch. It was 9:55, and Angelica wasn't yet ready to leave. "Ange, will you hurry?" she called. But Angelica was deep in conversation with her new receptionist. In actuality, Betsy Dittmeyer wasn't Angelica's personal secretary, but she was employed by the local Chamber of Commerce. Angelica had won the election for the presidency back in November and had officially taken office some 5 weeks before. Things hadn't gone so well during that time. The former chamber president and Angelica's former lover had made the transition as difficult as possible. So had the chamber's receptionist. "I don't know how much longer I can tolerate this impossible situation," Betsy cried, and sighed dramatically. "I'm sorry," Angelica apologized as she struggled into the sleeves of her leather jacket. "But you, more than anyone else, should understand the chamber's predicament. When Bob Kelly terminated our lease on the former chamber building, we had to scramble. I'm giving up a large portion of my storeroom until other arrangements can be made. It's embarrassing and inconvenient to have to share restroom facilities with the general public," Betsy huffed, setting her wastebasket filled with candy and other junk food wrappers, as well as a load of dirty tissues, on the floor, and her keeping on the counter. She must have been on her way to tote the trash out back when she stopped to berate Angelica. Prim and proper, Betsy lived her life by Robert's rules of order. At 50-something, she was barrel-shaped with brown hair streaked with gray. She took no gruff from anyone, and she didn't encourage frivolity of any sort. Tricia doubted the woman had ever smiled, let alone laughed. She watched as, with exaggerated care, Betsy yanked the sleeves of her maroon sweater over her wrists, then pulled it down over her rather large derriere. Tricia glanced at her watch once more. Thanks to Betsy, they'd hardly have time to look at the books before they would have to make a decision on whether or not to buy them. Betsy had a penchant for being annoying, and according to Angelica, the woman spent an inordinate amount of time tying up the cookery's facilities, usually timing her bathroom breaks for when the store was full of paying customers in need of a restroom visit. "I've got feelers out on several properties that might be available for rent, but Mr. Kelly hasn't been helpful about setting up the appointments," Angelica explained. And it was irritating that the property owners insisted that Angelica go through Bob. How long could they afford not to rent to the chamber? And was Bob subsidizing them in the interim out of spite? He couldn't do it forever. But meanwhile, Angelica's patience was near the snapping point, which was evident by the tightness in her voice. And it wasn't surprising that Angelica had a hard time holding on to her temper. Betsy constantly complained, despite the fact they'd been over the same ground at least 100 times since Angelica had won the election, beating Bob by a handful of votes to become chamber president on the first of the year. Meanwhile, the chamber's former digs up the street had remained empty and unrented. Spoilsport Bob had declined to even contemplate negotiating a new lease. Luckily, the door opened, interrupting what was sure to be another tense conversation. Unfortunately, it was Franny Mae Armstrong. And if you would like to know who Franny Mae Armstrong is, you can check this book out on the Libby app. Please join me here next week as I read from the beginning of The Lost Bookshop by E.B. Woods. Thank you and have a great week.